knows the way out. And apologies for Councillor Lloyd, substitute. So,
yeah, substitute Councillor Lloyd.
Okay, Bradley, substitute. Julie Guthridge, Peter Sona, no substitute, and Bob Copeland, substitute for item number 3, declarations of interest. No. Right, and then we're going to the main done item we've got here, the call in from the remuneration panel with review report. Councillor Wilson, and you take this first value, or was it? Do you have to say why you've called it in?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. I'd like to begin, Chair, by saying that we all know that members' allowances is a very emotive issue, and that throughout all this, when they put forward the call-in, this is not about people. I'm aware that some of the councillors today whose positions are in question. It isn't about people, it is about the positions and the correct remuneration. And part of the reason we have an independent remuneration panel is to try and depoliticise the issue of members' allowances. And I think we would all agree that perhaps if Parliament had done this a long time ago, then they would be in as much approbation with the public as we are. However, when it came to Cabinet, it became apparent that the portfolio holder was going to change a number of the recommendations from an independent panel without giving reason both to members and to the wider public at large. As can be seen from pages 8 and 9, we have gone through the reasons under Article 12 of the Constitution about the principles of decision making, and the relevant ones are B, D, F and G. So, firstly, under due consultation and the taking of professional advice from officers, this council at the budget setting meeting decided arbitrarily to amalgamate the standards and audit. Regardless of the merits or otherwise of that decision, it is clearly a change in the positions of this council. And the Cabinet took an arbitrary decision to allot a SRA to that new position without consultation either with other members or with the independent remuneration panel. Indeed, I suggested to the Cabinet at the time that it may be worthwhile referring the issue of the Standards and Audit Committee to the IRP to get their independent, unbiased opinion. No explanation was given by the portfolio as to why the decision to allocate the standards allowance was given. It could be that it is right, it could be that because you are amalgamating two sets of responsibilities, the amount should be higher. There is an argument to say that in this world where we need to prove that we are whiter than white, that it should be referred to them for their opinion first. Secondly, under due consultation, there was the issue of delinking the licensing committee chair from that of the planning committee, and I'll come on to that in a moment. The next plank of Article 12 is a presumption in favour of openness. Councillor Pomfret at the meeting recited a list of revised recommendations without giving reasons from departing from proposals of an independent panel. This is contrary to a presumption of being open and transparent. Then under Part F, options offered for consideration will be explained. Keeping the licensing chair at the same rate, no explanation for the option of keeping it was provided. Indeed, if we look at page 34 of the agenda, the independent remuneration panel gives some quite detailed guidance for why they have made their recommendations. They say that originally the two were linked together on a par with planning and licensing, and they are quite emphatic that it says, and I quote, "This is no longer the case." I go on, the planning committee meets every 3 weeks, while the full licensing committee meets 6 times per year, the same as overview and scrutiny panels. Even then, the full licensing committee, which also deals with taxi licensing issues, is occasionally cancelled due to lack of business. Therefore, they felt that there was a justification for reducing and delinking the licensing SRA from that of planning and putting it more on par with an OSP. The portfolio holder never gave a contrary opinion or reasoning or explanation to this recommendation from the IRP. Keeping the ability for members to claim in-borough travel. Again, no explanation for overturning the independent recommendation was provided. At page 21 of the agenda, it goes on to make specific recommendations with regards to travel and subsistence allowances within the borough. It says the basic allowance, which isn't being altered, is deemed to be inclusive of all in-borough travel and subsistence costs, and for those where it could cause an adverse impact, it makes an exception to this recommendation, where it says exceptions can be made in cases of personal safety or disability. This council currently provides either free car parking to all councillors on council business, or a bus pass for those who have no option but to use public transport. Therefore, the portfolio holder did not give a reasoning why it was thought to be acceptable to keep in-borough travel contrary to an independent recommendation. Thirdly, under options considered will be explained, removing the recommendation for a training allowance. No explanation was provided for overturning the independent recommendation. When it says about this in the report at page 31, it says that members are not equipping themselves with the skills to best represent the council and their constituents. We do have an issue about training, which is widely acknowledged on all sides of the chamber about training in this council, and also to do so within the constraints of the budget. However, there is an argument to say that we need to examine training more further, and I suggested to the Cabinet that they may wish to go back and ask the independent remuneration panel how it came to this conclusion and what recommendations they would make to actually see if this could be delivered to fruition. The opposition in this call-in are not saying that it is the right answer, we are saying that it should be explored, because there are various issues, like how do you quantify where it says 4 training sessions? Does that mean 4 separate days? Does that mean if you turn up for 1 day, does an AM and a PM session count as 2 sessions, or 1 because it is 1 day? We would have preferred to have seen, Chair, that the issue be referred to the relevant scrutiny panel, which I guess would have been this one, to investigate whether a training allowance is necessary, or, if not, to consider the training packages on offer to members to equip us with the skill sets necessary for doing our job. And then under Part G, the final limb that we have done it under Article 12 is the reasons for the decision will be recorded. The minutes simply say that the Cabinet have gone with different recommendations. They have not said why they have gone with different recommendations. Taking all of the above into account, Chair, we believe that the decision of Cabinet was flawed in these respects, particularly around giving their reasons for going against an independent remuneration panel or referring things back when there has been a change in circumstances. To that end, Chair, we would like to move, and it may help members if they look at page 47, which is the extract from the Cabinet minutes, which is what was decided by the Cabinet. I would like to move as an alternative recommendation from this OSP to go wherever it needs to go, where it says A, the basic allowance 2016-17 and 1 SRA rule are maintained. I would like to insert pending a review of the panel suggestion of a training SRA for all councillors. The training allowance issue be referred to OSP for investigation. At B, we would like to keep the chair of the licensing committee allowance, then delete the rest of the sentences and say is reduced to £3,441 in accordance with the recommendations in the report. The Standards and Audit Committee shall be referred back to the Independent Remuneration Panel and paid at the old Standards Committee rate in the interim. We would keep C and D, and then at E, that the ability for members to claim in-borough travel is removed, and then keep the rest of that. F and G and H would remain as printed. And that is a summary of the call-in chair.
Philip, can you give them to say why they're calling it valid?
Well, Chair, all I can say is under the terms of the OSP procedure rules, there obviously for a call-in to be valid, it clearly has to be related back to Article 12, which clearly this does. And beyond that, the only other procedural requirement is that it be submitted by one member of the OSP and 2 other members of the council. So clearly what we have complies with that as well. So in terms of what is before us, that it was deemed to be a valid calling request, which is why we proceeded to call the meeting.
Okay, thanks for that. Can I welcome Councillor Pomfret to the panel, and if you wish to sit at the table, Councillor? Thank you. Thank you. To give us a wee bit of background to say why the decisions were made before I would ask the OSP members to question and debate them down.
Right, okay. Let's start off with the licensing and planning. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the remuneration panel's report. Some of those observations are obviously true at the moment, but this report and its conclusions are for the next 4 years, and I don't think we felt that that the situation at this particular moment necessarily is going to pertain for the next 4 years. We all know that, for example, the amount of work that comes planning way is affected by all sorts of factors which may or may not continue to exist. Similarly with licensing, there have been changes in the national picture there which have reduced the committee's workload at the moment. It's not certain that that will persist, and certainly there are 1 or 2 changes which will possibly lead to increases in the licensing committee's workload. So I think we need to take a longer term view than what's just happening at the moment. Travel, well, most councillors, I mean, I don't have the actual figures of how many councillors claim and how often they claim and so on and so forth, but most councillors do not claim for in borough travel for meetings, be it here or elsewhere in the borough. And the report mentions and reports what the situation is, that people who have mobility issues of one sort or another, or safety issues, can apply for the ability to have their expenses reimbursed. It does not, though, mention members' financial situation. All it does say is that the basic allowance covers travelling. Well, they've decided that. It hasn't been the case up to now, and it is, as far as I'm concerned, just an assertion rather than an actual fact. What other issues were there? The training allowances. Well, Councillor Wilson was actually at Cabinet and gave a number of reasons why now wasn't the time to have the implementation of the training allowances, which are basically, a sum taken out of the basic allowance because of basically practical issues with dealing with what counts as a session, and perhaps newer councillors having more need for training perhaps in their first 12 months than councillors who have had longer terms experience and so on. If Overview and Scrutiny wants to look at these issues, then far be it from me to say that what an Overview and Scrutiny panel should do. One issue which hasn't been mentioned is really the 5, I think, councillors who made representations of one sort and another to the panel. 3 of them are in the room here at the moment. So you can see, although it's, you know, politically it is seen as a sensitive issue, actually most councillors are not vastly perplexed by the system of remuneration which we have. I think I've covered all the points, but I've probably missed 1 or 2. If anybody would like to raise them with me, with the chairperson, I'll address them.
Councillor Bolton, did you indicate?
I did indicate that it was for clarity what was being moved when it was speaking about the chair of licensing. I thought, did you say 3,400 and something?
3441 is in the recommendation in the papers.
But it says here that the panel recommendation should be reset at 3,883. Or am I confused with something else? It was purely, at this point, that's what I was asking, Chair, or intended to ask.
Councillor Haynes?
Yeah. The Cabinet consists of elected members. Members who are elected by the people out there to look after their interests. The remuneration panel is purely set up to advise if need be. But the day-to-day running of the town and the business of the town, we give to the cabinet members who are elected members of people of Nuneaton and Bedworth. And the remuneration panel can only make recommendations. The people who run the council day to day is elected members, and not remuneration panels.
Councillor Hancock?
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused as to where we are at the moment, Chair, but I also wanted to clarify something as well. And I'm not sure, I've maybe got a contribution when we're debating it, but I wanted to clarify, Councillor Wilson moved something that said, we want to move. Now, who is we? Is it the people that's called this in, the names of the people that's called it in, or is it the people that's sitting on this scrutiny panel? Because that's all I heard, we, and then there was a list of things in the proposal read out, which I haven't got a copy of, and it was quite lengthy, and I think that would be useful to have had sight of.
Chair, it so happened that Councillor Goodrich wasn't given the opportunity to second it at the time.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't looking to look for a vote at a particular time. That's what we were looking to. Anyway. Well, Councillor Clandicar.
Right, thank you. That last point is very interesting. We need sight of what the Conservatives' proposal is, because what we didn't have at the Cabinet meeting was sight of the Labour Cabinet proposals. We were allowed to speak, but only allowed to speak before the proposed changes were made, and therefore we couldn't possibly comment on the appropriateness or not of each individual change, because we were allowed to speak and then the proposed changes were made. So that goes against the principles of good decision making, because we could have said something which was taken into account then in the decision. So we may get less call-ins if actually we can see things in advance, discuss them and go through issues before the Cabinet votes, rather than you can have 3 minutes to speak, and then we'll change what we're proposing and take a vote. That's the first point. Second point, no one's mentioned broadband. One of the things I raised with the remuneration panel was the fact that councillors have been councillors for a long while, in the days when broadband was expensive and rare, had broadband supplied by the council. There was a period when people could have broadband if they wanted it, so people like me who already had broadband said, no, don't bother, I will just use my existing broadband because I'd paid for it anyway. I didn't expect the council to pay for it. And then there's new members now, in the last year or so, when we do not provide broadband. But members who've been around for a long while and have got broadband have had the council paying for the broadband at a period when new members cannot get it, and that's an inequality that I think should be fixed immediately and not wait till 2018. We've got various things in here. I agree that the licensing should be rescaled. If licensing suddenly becomes a hot potato and we have to have a licensing committee every 3 weeks, then we could revisit that. But at the moment, on the level of meetings, it is similar to other committees. And I've said to the remuneration panel, the scrutiny panels, if they meet 6 times a year plus 1 or 2 extras, that's about £600 per meeting on £3,600. People do not understand why a chair of a meeting necessarily gets £600 per meeting unless there's an awful lot of work going in to prepare for that meeting, etc. So, and particularly with the whole of these appointments all being in the control of the Labour group, Councillor Haynes mentioned that people elect these people. Well, actually, people elect their individual members, and the members of the Labour group choose who the leader is, and then the leader chooses who the cabinet is and things. So it is not a directly elected system. It is a system of patronage and privilege within the Labour Party. And I think, given that, we should be paying allowances that are proportionate to the job, proportional to chairing a meeting, £1,000 per year, that's fine, as long as it's a reasonable sum per meeting.
Councillor Wilson, you wanted to come back and a point of clarification?
Yes, Chair. Just to respond to Councillor Coughlin, it was my mistake. I do apologise. I wrote the wrong figure down. It should be 3,883. I was reading the line above the actual thing in the paper, but I'll listen to the rest of the debate.
Anybody else got anything to add to the debate? Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry for Catherine. I think personally that we ought to do more training. We're learning all the time, and training helps us look at different avenues, at different ideas differently. We try and think outside the box, and I fully support that. I think we ought to do the training. Going back to the licensing, I agree with the recommendations that we don't meet as much as the planning officer, so obviously the remuneration should be the difference. And that's basically all I've got to say about it.
Councillor Copeland.
Well, I always find it interesting when people, whoever they are, talk about payments per meeting, and it becomes a figure per meeting. It just doesn't work like that. There is work that's done other than chairing a meeting. You're in a position of responsibility and can be contacted on issues. Now, I haven't got a problem personally with a licensing one. And I say that as the current chair. And as you say, Councillor Wilson, it's not about people, but I'm just declaring that. Because there is less meetings. I didn't actually go, and everybody had the opportunity, I accept, to go and meet and discuss with a panel. But actually it's quite an interesting one because, and this is just, I'm speaking from experience, as chair of licensing, and I'm not saying it happens often, but it happens, where you then end up at the magistrates' court if somebody appeals against a decision. The chair, generally it's the chair, Councillor Hancock has in the past, subbed for me, if you like, and that can be, well, there was one case where it was 3 days in a court, right? So, and okay, I possibly should have gone along and spoke of that. I just take the view that the remuneration panels there, they'll have all the need in front of them and they'll make the decision and come to that. So it's quite correct to say that on licensing, meetings are cancelled, because they are factually true. But there are other factors then that make it interesting. Now, I'm not sure that the panel have all, well, I would hazard a guess that they don't have all the evidence. And okay, as I state once again, maybe that's my fault. But I didn't see it as my duty to go along and argue the case or even put the case for a particular chair. As far as I was concerned, the panel would get the evidence and come to a conclusion. But that's just one instance or one sort of set of circumstances where, yeah, drop it down, less meetings, but you could spend a lot of time, in other ways as the chair. I'm sure it happens with other responsibilities. So going back to that, I do find it I don't know what the phrase is or the word is, but I don't like the idea per meeting. Hundreds of pounds per meeting, because that's a nonsense. Training, I agree. Training, it's actually bad, the attendance at training by councillors. It's not bad, it's shocking. It's shocking at times, the attendance. Now, I like to think I'm one of the... Now, I'm retired now, so I can come along. But even when I was at work, I managed to come along a lot of the time to training sessions, because normally what we do, we have an afternoon session, we've got one on Wednesday, an afternoon session and an evening session, so people can choose. Now, I've sat in rooms of 2 people, 3 people, so it is bad. But how that looked to me was, there's your allowance, but you're not having it all until you've been trained. So you have to turn up for 4 sessions. That's a bit insulting to me, if I'm perfectly honest. I haven't got a problem with a training allowance, because you're coming to something. It's more work, if you like, but it's quite vital, yeah. But I just didn't like the way that was there, so I certainly would argue against that. And it's also interesting, I'm going to be quite honest and frank here, and I'm not being political, because it is across the board. Attendance at meetings by some councillors. Now, everybody can throw at the Labour, but the other parties have an issue that's similar. There are people that don't come to meetings as much as they should. Interestingly enough, some of them are now councillors elsewhere as well. Now, maybe that is a little bit of a dig, because, well, we know who took the seats at the county elections. But you've got members whose attendance here is not very good, and yet they're quite happy to put themselves forward and be chosen by the public, yeah, to be their representative in another council. Now, attendance is a thing. How people become a councillor and then suddenly apologies for meetings. I just don't understand it. Which brings me, of course, as well to the fact that allowances are emotive or whatever they are. Well, I personally don't find it emotive at all. I think what it is if we didn't have allowances for councillors, then who would take up the roles? People that could afford to. And that's what it was probably like a long time ago. Well, I don't think that's right. I think people should have a decent remuneration, because, hey-ho, we all need money to live. So it just interests me that, there's this thing about people want to become councillors, but they can't get time off work. Well, they should have thought of that before, and I'm sorry, but there are ways and means of doing that. I've been there myself. I've had some fantastic employers, and I've had some that have been very, very difficult getting time off. But I'm afraid, if you're on the council, you've either got to be here or go. No. That's all I've got to say.
Councillor Haynes.
No, Bob's covered some of the points.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Chair. It is on a similar vein, but I'll try not to be repetitive. A bit like Councillor Copeland. Well, I've been a councillor for 27 years now, and like Councillor Copeland, I've had good employers and employers that haven't been so keen on giving me time off. And you have to work around that one way or another. I think in some instances, some councillors that have been elected weren't expecting to be elected and didn't put anything in place with their employees prior to elections. And really, you should do that. You should make sure with your employer before you get elected that you're going to be able to do your duties, because you're elected to represent the people that have elected you. And if you're not able to carry out your duties effectively, then you shouldn't be doing it. Simple as that, Chair. But in regards to training, I do feel that those proposals to remove money from the allowances were a bit heavy-handed. I think if certain members don't want to do the training that is deemed required of them, then they should be dealt with internally. Now, certainly with planning, licensing, and I think a couple of others of the statutory committees, under the audit, under the Constitution, you have to have training. Otherwise, you're not allowed to sit on those committees. If people aren't doing that, then the chairs should be informed, and the groups should be informed, and those people removed from those committees. I actually think you should be attending training to carry out your role effectively as a councillor. And if people aren't doing that, then perhaps people out there that have elected them should know about it. But it seems heavy-handed to me to penalise everybody for those that don't do it. Because in 27 years, I don't think I've ever lost my enthusiasm to carry out my role as an effective councillor, and that includes training. Yes, there are times when you can't do something because of other things happen in your life, but generally that's what you should be doing. So like Councillor Copeland, I did actually find that quite insulting on a personal basis. Which then brings me on to the issue about travel. Claiming travel allowance has never been part of the basic allowance. And again, why should people be penalised because certain people don't want to claim? Those certain people may be quite well or better off financially than those that do claim. And so it is one of those difficult ones. Where do you go with that? I also think by making that recommendation from the remuneration panel verges on an equality issue as well. Because I don't see anybody suggesting that officers of this council have their travel allowance removed from them. People that work for this authority are on whatever wage they're on. As far as I know, that doesn't include when they've got to travel around the borough on business because they claim mileage allowance for it. Unless somebody's going to tell me they don't. No, nobody's telling me that. So I think there's an inequality there as well. I'm going to leave it there, Chair, except I will say, in regards to Councillor Condacor's continuing conspiracy theories, he is clearly not aware of the roles of committee chairs and the other things that go in behind it. So just to say, it's a certain amount per meeting, per year, clearly isn't like that. And I suspect he knows that, but he just likes to put his conspiracy theories across there, wherever. Thanks, Chair.
Any other Councillor Condacor?
A couple things. Obviously there's more than the numbers of meetings, but it's the most significant and easiest thing to do.
Chair, in fairness, it's not what he said. He had a figure per meeting.
Yeah, because it's an easy thing to say. And if you say the meetings are half the work or whatever, it's still an easy meeting. In terms of travel expenses, the staff here are paid travel expenses when they go out somewhere, but they're not paid to come to work. The actual going to their normal job, coming to the council house, is expected of them. If they then are on planning or licensing, they go out in the day, that is an expenses. So it's working out what is included as your starting point effectively. And really, with the parking paid for out the back here, or if there's planning meeting at Bedworth Civic Hall, then actually the amounts being claimed for actual little bits of travel were far more bureaucratic to claim in terms of the organisation than was hardly worth it. In terms of the whole system, I totally get that people need to be well paid to do these roles so that they can afford to do them and they do not need to be rich to do them. The £5,000 basic allowance roughly is the sort of amount of money that it attracts a reasonable number of people to become councillors. It reasonably compensates their time, and if you look at the report from the Remuneration Committee, it seems to think that 40% of it is you're doing it because you want to do it, and 60% is as a job. So, yeah, it is not a paid as a job, but it is you're assisted to do it with the allowance. We haven't really talked much about broadband again, and on the point of attendance and training, one thing that seems to work quite well at the county is actually they publish annually, actually it's a rolling thing, but yeah, you can see annually, what the attendance rate is. At this council we do not actually publish. Councillor Smith, for example, attends 80% of the meetings he should. So I think if we want to manage attendance, and probably the same with training, to actually use the medium of an annual single page spreadsheet, attended 4 units of training, 80% of the meetings, might be more effective than lots of complicated stuff with allowances docked and added and things. And the final point is, when you start being a councillor, you go to a phenomenal number of training sessions, if you're like me, in year 1. Then in year 2, you've been to a phenomenal number of training sessions, so you've had them all. So I think we do need to look, if we are having a training requirement, as it being a rolling 2 years or something, so you don't get any artifacts of going to a lot of training when you're first elected, and then the year after, you've done every training for audits, child protection, planning, etc. And so it is actually as useful in that second year. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually encouraged to see that on the larger issues that there is a degree of agreement across the committee, because none of us would sit here and say that we're in this for the money, because none of us really are in this for the money. And I completely 100% agree with Councillor Copeland that it is about getting a decent remuneration, and it's a balancing act, and it is a balancing act in what we do. Councillor Haynes is right that it is elected members who make decisions. However, there is a reason why we have independent recommendations, and that is because in the past politicians at various levels and of various colours have got themselves into a whole load of trouble about allowances and expenses, and that is why we have independent panels. And perhaps if we'd have had those before at parliamentary level, there wouldn't have been the whole problem 2009-2010. Indeed, I have sat there in the chamber opposite when certain councillors have criticised MPs and criticised other councils about what is going on with their allowances because they haven't followed independent recommendations. And so I think we need to adopt a consistent approach. If we are going to employ people to be an independent panel, we need to listen to them. Yes, the buck stops with us, but Councillor Haynes said we have 6 people elected to make a decision, but there are 34 of us who actually are under the allowances regime, so it needs to take account of all of us. Perhaps there is a lesson to learn for the future that when these things go on, it is more publicised about the consultation for other members. I certainly know that it went to other members, but perhaps it wasn't as publicised as it should be, so that backbenchers and committee chairs can have their say too. I automatically got one as the leader of the opposition. That's why I had my 2 pence into the report. Also, it's important to note that of these 4 people who have made the recommendations, 2 are actually our own residents. So we have to look at, throughout this process, what would the man on the street think about what we are discussing tonight? And indeed, one of them is a former Labour councillor in Jeff Hunton. I know Jeff well because he's been a family friend for decades. With regards to mileage, Councillor Condecore is actually right when he says that actually we are not paid, that people who come to this authority, they claim mileage because it is a business need, but they do not get paid to turn up to work. It happens to all of us, whether we're in public or private sector. When I go to work, do I get paid for driving to Coventry and back? No, I don't. If work forces me to go from Coventry to Birmingham, then yes, it is entirely appropriate for work to pay for my expenses to do that. So there are different rules which govern employment, and actually technically, although we get taxed as being employed, we aren't technically employed by the council. Training. It is a big issue. Councillor Pomfret was right. I did actually make a point of saying that there were flaws in the proposal, but if you look at actually what I have suggested in the recommendation I put before you tonight, is that we continue with the suggestion of Cabinet until it has had an opportunity to be explored by Scrutiny to see whether it is a viable option to look at doing a training SRA, how it would work. If it doesn't work, we can scrap it. We can actually agree with the Cabinet recommendation. But there is a fundamental flaw in how we do training at this authority. Because I spoke to Democratic Services and they told me that we haven't had a proper training session for members in 2 years because of take-up. But we also have to look at what it is on offer we are giving in terms of, you know, getting people in for training sessions, not committee-related training sessions, but for example, how to do OSP effectively, how to chair a committee. Those ones which we used to get, we haven't done in almost 2 years. But perhaps it would force council to look at what we offer members. Many of us, and I know we get fed up of them in our emails, we get bombarded with emails telling us that we can go on this fantastic training course if we're willing to pay £150. That's not going to happen. But we need to look at the offer we are giving members about training and whether it is really what members need and want. Because Councillor Condacor is right, and others have said if you do year 1, you get all your training there and then years 2 and 3, there isn't as much of a pool. But to ignore the recommendation out of hand is, in my view, silly, because they have obviously taken a great deal of thought about it, because otherwise they wouldn't have put it in their recommendation. Let's investigate it and see if it works. If it doesn't, if we can't find a system to make it work, I'll be the first to say let's not do it. But to rule it out of hand without giving a reasoning at Cabinet, in my view, was wrong, and that is part of the reason why it was called in. Perhaps not all of what the opposition have called for will go through today. I suspect not a lot, but I would certainly hope that at least we can try and agree on licensing. Councillor Copeland is right that there are different pools and demands on time, that he goes to court when he is required to or asked a substitute to go in his place. But then you could also argue that that is compensated for by the fact that other committees are cancelled. So there are various different ways of looking at it, but we have to, above all, whenever we come to these deliberations, we have to think what the man on the street would think about what we are doing. Because ultimately it's not our money, it's their money that we're paying out. Because this council has no money of its own. It all belongs to the taxpayer at the end of the day. We're just the custodians.
Anybody else? Councillor Hancock?
I'll come in after.
Okay.
John hasn't spoken before.
Councillor Bowman.
Chair, I must say that just looking down the list of what the Cabinet have put together, I think it's quite reasonable. The councillors have an option of making decisions having had advice. I think when it comes to the licensing committee, quite frankly, I came off licensing committee as a choice because I found it too hard. It's really different from sitting on a committee like this. It's structured in a different way. It has legal officers sitting alongside. The participants in the licensing committee procedures have untold legal rights that are maintained. You have to sit and listen to stuff that you would not ordinarily be listening to. And you're being invited to make decisions which are really difficult. Someone's livelihood can be taken away by the decision you make on licensing committee, and it's a totally different aspect. Now, I think the chair of licensing is quite a highly skilled job and has to be, is reined in by all these legal contexts that apply there. And the depth of knowledge for that chairmanship to be effective, I think is totally different again. So I would support what it says about maintaining the licensing chairman's allowance at what it is. Because to just simply take the number of meetings, I mean, in the end, you could get to the ridiculous situation where if planning cancels a meeting, the chairman's allowance is reduced by that amount. It's just silly. And to equate any councillor's role as just turning up at committees and taking part in committees is nonsense. The telephone goes, you answer it, you make notes about the person's problem, you phone officers, you try and research how it came to be that the person is that disturbed by what the council is saying or doing to them. And it is a time-consuming job at times. We've had references to Councillor Doxty, who was missing supposedly from this council because he was working in Hull. The fact is, his telephone was going. He was still working on problems that the constituents had, and he was solving problems. Some of those problems have been quite time-consuming and difficult to manage, but he's done it. And we all similarly take on the job of councillor, not just being involved in sitting at meetings or even attending full council. It's your relationship with constituents. I had to pick up some of Councillor Doherty's work, I must say. And when I picked it up, it was horrendous. Constituents who were demanding time on the telephone for hours, and unresolvable problems, really, and problems which lay in the civil courts rather than in the council. But, you know, you try and manage as best you can to solve the problems and act as a councillor. Likewise, as has been said, on committees like licensing, it's a different kettle of fish, if you like, from sitting on a committee such as this. So I think the proposals, for instance, around broadband and the provision of that computer, there are members who have relied on this council to support them in that managing that IT. And this is a time-limited proposal that will see that allowance and that support disappear. I think that's quite reasonable, because over time there will be members just like me who take no allowances for IT support and broadband and so on. I manage that from home, and I do get an allowance which is put into there as just a standard communication allowance, because it has to be maintained as part of your councillor's duties. So I don't have a problem with any of this. I would support what has gone through Cabinet, and I would vote accordingly.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Chair. I want to thank Councillor Beaumont for that. It expressed the views very well. But I wanted to go back to the issue over training, because Councillor Wilson said that things had been ignored out of hand. Well, they haven't. They certainly haven't by me, because we'd be foolish to do that. We'd be foolish not to give proper consideration to any recommendations given to us. But having said that, Chair, if we followed every recommendation given to us by either the remuneration panel or by officers of the council, then there'd be no need for us as councillors. Let the officers run it. The reason we're here is to represent people out there. We're not here to agree with everything, but like planning, if you're going to disagree with things, have proper reasons for that disagreement. So I think it was unfortunate that was suggested that people have ignored the recommendations out of hand. I don't believe they have. I think proper consideration has been given, but people have taken a slightly different view to those recommendations. Thank you.
I'm assuming from that you're seconded Councillor Bowman's. Councillor Bowman made a suggestion about.
Well, I would suggest we support the Cabinet's recommendations.
I think through you.
Second.
You say that, okay. Councillor Pomfret, would you like to add anything else to discourse?
I don't think I've got anything significant to add, Chair, thank you.
Okay. If I can just come in for a couple of minutes, there's what I've been here at the council just a couple of years short of Bob Copeland, because the two started this a great number of years. And once upon a time, central government used to say about committee meetings, and you got paid an allowance for attending committee meetings. But you see, they're they're calling too many meetings, so they're boosting up there, you know. Through all those years, everybody's got conspiracy theories about what councillors can do, what councillors can't do. I know my own personal experience with the National Coal Board was absolutely horrendous. I never got a single penny off National Coal Board. The only thing I got was allowances, the time off, but I lost my pay, I lost my where anyway. A long story. So I never got anything off that. And those days there were allowances, so they turned around and said, what we'll do is we'll give you a fixed amount every year. You can have as many meetings as you want, we'll give you a fixed amount every year, and that would be part of the overall judgment. That is, once again, with these independent panels, the only time this government seems to be interested in independent panels is when they decide that they should get an increase and other people shouldn't get an increase. But that's by the by. So we've got two options in front of us tonight as I see it. We've got a motion from Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Duttridge. Yeah. Councillor Condacor has made a suggestion. Is that a friendly amendment to your what you're proposing?
I was just commenting on the various issues in the remuneration panel.
I was just trying to tidy things up to say whether that would be part of it or not.
I don't think it was, Chair.
No.
Okay, so it's not a friendly thing with him. And of course that takes us to we agree with what the Cabinet says. So it's a straightforward vote. Sorry, Councillor Cope.
I just want to make one comment, if you'll allow me, Chair, because it's been said what the public think or would think. I think I would add to that, and particularly in today's age of social media, where it seems like the people that are most critical are the loudest, and I think that's probably always been the case in a sense. But what I would say is not what the public think. I would actually have used the phrase, I would like to use the phrase, what a reasonable member of the public would think. Because I think as politicians we do have to accept nature of the world, and see the skin here, it's as thick as anything, it has to be over the years, that if you ask the public, they'd hang us rather than pay us. So I think, and I understand the thinking, what the public think, but I would actually put what the reasonable member of the public would think. Because, trust me, I've come off, well, to a great degree, off Facebook. Not that it bothered me what people said, but I thought, why do I have to read? Why does my family have to read when people are using, right down to the C word, about me?
Obscene.
And so I would add that, what a reasonable member of the public think. And there are loads of people out there, of course there are, vast majority of people are in that category. But, well, let's not ask the public what they think, because we know who'll come back and how they'll come back. That's my experience. And I'm well aware that the camera's somewhere, and people, when they see this tomorrow or whenever it is, they'll be going at me. Well, I'm here. Okay, I think it's up there somewhere. It's Bob again.
Councillor Condacor.
Just a quick procedural thing. The Tory motion was the first one suggested, so that
Yes.
should be the first one voted on. And do we vote on it in entirety or in parts? I.e., obviously, there was a couple of proposals in there. Do we do it en bloc as all these, or do we do the licensing, the travel, the things all separate?
That's what was moved. Mr. Richardson?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to jump in there to say technically what Councillor Beaumont has moved is an amendment, and so you will need to deal with that as an amendment to the original motion, and deal with that first. If that is carried, that then becomes the substantive motion, and then Councillor Wilson's motion would fall, and then it would be that would either go to the vote for approval, or it's then amenable to further amendment after that.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair, but doesn't Councillor Beaumont negate the original motion, so it's not an amendment? the same rules, wouldn't the same procedure rules apply as a council?
My understanding of what Councillor Bones has moved is that the original cabinet decision be approved. Or
That wasn't the
endorsed.
recommendation that was originally moved. There was no recommendation on the table until I moved one.
Well, as I understand it, what Councillor Beaumont is suggesting is that he just deletes all of your wording and then substitutes.
But that's negating the original motion. Mine was the original motion.
I don't think it negates it. He's not saying not. He's not saying that.
He is.
He's not saying
The
not.
the motion's being put, and John's amendment is the one that's being dealt with first, and that it's a simple.
You say it's not an amendment.
It's your decision, Chair. You'll have to determine whether you think it negates the motion. But the rules in the council procedure will say that you should not negate a motion. Now that usually means by taking the wording, just adding the word "not" before to say "not be" whatever. As far as I know, that's not what Councillor Beaumont has moved. He's just simply saying, I don't accept what Councillor Wilson says, I want to delete all of that and just say it be that the cabinet decision be endorsed or approved or whatever terminology used.
Councillor Condacor.
I was going to come on Chris's point. You can't just delete all the words and replace them with different words that have a totally different effect. The effect of the Tory motion was actually to change the recommendation from Cabinet. You just deleting all of it means we don't get to vote on what was proposed.
And that is the effect of the amendment, Chair. And that's why he did this in that way.
Councillor Copeland.
Chair, as far as I'm concerned, we're making hard work of this because the end result will be whatever the end result is, and people watching it will be thinking, "Gee whiz, what the hell are they doing now?" So, as far as I'm concerned, Chair, whatever way you take it, we'll get to the end result, and that will be the result. Go for it.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, if you look at the recommendation, it is to, the original recommendation that was moved was to move that the licensing chair be reduced to 3,883 as per the original recommendation. Councillor Beaumont is suggesting to delete that and leave it as it is. That is negating what the original motion was. Again, when it refers to in-borough travel, the original motion was that we recommend that the ability for members to claim in-borough travel is removed. Councillor Beaumont is suggesting, or moving, sorry, that it should be maintained. That is both opposite to remove, and by changing the wording, that is negating the original motion.
Councillor Condacor.
Can I propose an amendment to Councillor Beaumont's amendment to say that the allowance for the chair of licensing be modified as suggested by the independent committee?
I would have to take that as an individual all the way through. That's what we're trying not to do. I'm going to finish this off by saying Councillor Beaumont's motion stands in front of the panel today. All those in favour of that, the Cabinet
And you support the cabinet decision?
decision, yeah. All those against?
Can I have my
Can I
vote
have my
recorded,
vote recorded,
Chair?
please?
Of course, all the time.
Oh, by the way, Chair, could I have mine recorded as well, please? Thank you.
I've funny feeling the camera's recorded it. So that becomes a substantial motion, is that correct?
That's correct.
Let's get the things right. I hate this. So that becomes substantial motion. All in favour?
Yep.
Those against?
Can I have my vote recorded,
Again.
please?
Yeah.
That is carried.
It's a matter of
I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance tonight and safe journey home. Close the meeting.
Having said that, any of these things, I won't be at the council meeting at 5:05.
Right, well, we'll see somebody there.